All right, so the process framework. This module, we're going to talk about what a process is and how it stands and brings value added to the TPI effort. Along with that, we'll talk about why you need to define a process and the things that TPI brings in the process framework for helping someone come up with a process. All right, so a process, as you may, well, it's heavily used term, so let's define what it is in TPI. It's a set of steps, and a set of steps for doing something. So the trick is that the process guides you in your work. It's not a blow-by-blow inhale and exhale. It's something that gives you a reminder about what's next to be done. And it's really important to have a process when you are doing something multiple times, like if you're a house painter and you've got a whole block of houses to paint, or you've got a set of requirements to write, and after this set of requirements, you have another set of requirements. So when you have this kind of not the identical things you have to do, but you're in the same domain doing the same job over and over, a process is invaluable. So the reason why is because you can take that process and say, these are the steps I need to go through to do this job, like digging a ditch or painting a house. And you can use that to plan your work. If I got to dig 20 ditches for an irrigation plan in the front yard, you know there's 20 ditches, and you can use that process to say, all right, what do I have to do for each ditch? So when you have that process with that generic set of steps, you can take it and say, I got to dig a ditch in the front. It's going to be about 50 feet long. And I got to dig 3 ditches on the side that are about 10 feet long. And with this this process, you can change, you can turn your that process into plan by filling in the blanks. Kind of, how long is a ditch? 20 feet. Oh, it's going to take half an hour. Oh, 2 feet. Oh, that's just going to take a few minutes. And so you have the specifics about time and size in a plan when you apply a process to the things you have to do. I have the analogy of you define all the rocks in your pile, and then you size and time those rocks. So why would you define a process? Okay, so what you want to be able to have is when you're doing something, you want to, like we mentioned in the beginning, you want to understand your abilities. And so if you've done something 20 times before, you can pretty much plan that your next time you have to do it the 21st time, it's going to be similar to the way you did the other 20. So having a process that you use for all those other 20 will help you become more reasonable in expecting the 21st will be like the other 20. So you can predict what's going to be happening to you, as well as you can expect what your results are going to be when you do the work. Now, also a process helps you optimize what you're doing when you're doing your work. You can reorder the steps if you find that it's awkward. If you had a process that involved getting a bunch of signatures, you might find that doing it first couple of times, getting signatures at a couple different places in your process caused a lot of overhead. And if you can rearrange it so get all the signatures at once, that would optimize your waiting time. So those kinds of things. And also like a lean, you would find that you can rearrange the steps in your process to go and do all your preparation at once instead of preparing here and preparing there. And so that is another vehicle that having a process being used over and over helps you do. In addition to that, it helps you focus on what the current step is, because you know the rest of the steps are documented ahead of you. You don't have to worry about trying to keep the bubble on everything you have to do. You can lean on the fact that you're going to follow the process and focus on what's being done now. Lastly, by collecting the data while you're following this process, you can get that insight into where you spend your most time, where you make the most mistakes, where you see the opportunities for improvement best. And that is by acting on and looking at the data you've captured by following the same process multiple times. So in an organization, processes have their place. Usually you talk about what happens when a process describes what happens in an organization, like the fact that you're going to do peer reviews, you're going to hold peer reviews. The organizational process would say, yeah, you hold the peer review before this and after that. And so you have its place. And reason this process has to has to follow and support the policies and standards that the organization has. Oftentimes those organizations have those processes or standards and policies imposed on them, like the medical field, or they want to be the best at what they're doing, and so they have a standard for do it this good or better. And so the processes are constrained by those policies and standards the organization has to work from. Now, processes then lead to having procedures, and those procedures talk about the how to. In that example about a peer review, the process might hand wave at holding a peer review, but the procedure will say, well, we do it by posting the artifacts out in a shared drive, send an email out to the individuals telling them they have a day or two to review it and put their concerns in a spreadsheet on the shared drive. That's the how to. But the fact that you're doing a peer review is what the process is talking to. So you don't have to blow by blow about how you do the work. You talk about what has to be done. Now, when you have procedures, that has to be supported by the training. Where's the shared drive? How do I get access to it? You use Excel? How do we do that? What are the artifacts in? Do I have those tools? And so you have the tools and training that organization has to have in there to allow people to do the how-tos to support the processes. All right, so one of the things you want to do is when you are defining your process, you want to have it laid out that a process is happening from what you know from your personal experience. If it's a team, then the team gets together and talks about how do we dig ditches? How do we paint fences? And so you want to have a process that the team has experience with, or if you don't have experience with it, that someone else has experience with that shares it with you. Don't try to have the analysis paralysis problem of trying to come up with the perfect process to stand up, get something in place, use it, and then improve it as you find it has places that can be improved. All right, so what does TPI bring to the table to support process definition? Well, we're going to show you examples of these things, but in the high level, you have scripts that guide the individual either online or by paper, or however they do it, to remind them what they need to do before they get the process going and how they know they're done with the process. There's a bunch of measures, not a lot, a few measures. There's a lot of organizations I've worked with that over-metriced their organization and seemingly perception-wise didn't use the data. So we really minimize the data we're collecting in TPI, and that is the part that gives you the insight into how the process works, where your time is spent, where your mistakes are made. Forms and logs, TPI has a number of formats. Like the tool can do it differently, but usually the tools are going to support the forms and logs. These are things that are all paperless that are helping you to capture the data and to get the data come to you quickly to be able to see it in a form that can help you get your insights quickly without dragging through and diving through a bunch of raw data. Here's an example of a script. It has, in this case, the blue text you see down the left side. Those are the 4 steps of the process. At the top, you have the entry criteria about when do you know you should be doing this process, and so you're not doing it prematurely in the bigger picture in the cycle. At the bottom, you have the exit criteria. What should you have when you're done with this process? And in the middle, you not just have the high-level description of each step, but some of the details that are like a expert level guidance or guidance for an expert. It's a reminder about the things you should be doing in each of these phases, each of these steps, so that you know when you're done with one and move on to the next. This is an example of requirements generation. And so you have those 4 steps. There's 1,000 ways to do this. This is just one. And like Jeff mentioned in the overview, TPI doesn't force you to do things a certain way. Like you don't design a certain way, you don't do requirements a certain way. We just tell you when you're doing requirements, capture this process. So as far as the measures go, what you're trying to capture, some of the things in bold on this slide, you want to find out how much time you spend each of the steps of that process, or this tasks in your plan of I'm digging ditch number 3. How much time is spending me spending me to mark out where it starts and stops. And that'd be one of your steps of digging a ditch. And so the time you spend marking out the start and stop for ditch number 3 is what you're capturing. And then there's also the mistakes made and fixed. So you don't know when you make a mistake. We'll talk about this in quality, but you do know when you found and fixed one. And so we try to capture that information too. More on that in the quality framework. Then uh, when you have this kind of data being captured, then you can take that history performance and realize, oh shoot, I'm planning out another 3 front yards full of irrigation ditches. Well, I've done two front yards already, and you can look at that, take your performance you had from before, and assume you perform like that again if all the other estimate or all the other factors are in line, and you can figure out how long it's going to take you to do those. Do the work, look at your progress as you're doing the work and find out, oh shoot, this yard's got caliche. I'm going to have to double all my time estimates for digging. And you can act on that while you're in the middle of the execution of that cycle, as well as making other improvements to your process, both in the, like Jeff showed, the general cycle of you plan the work, and do the retrospective. That's where you would improve your process for the next project you're going to do, the next block of front yards you're going to be digging ditches for. So there are a couple of measures besides the 2 I just mentioned. Size, effort, which is the time it takes you to do the job. Quality, which is your mistakes you've made and you've found and fixed. And then completion dates. Those are the only 4 things that we're trying to capture in here. And with that, all the other metrics are derived from these 4 raw measures. So when you're capturing information and time or performance data, we take the set of steps and we apply them to that ditch. The set of steps can be called phases. Well, each phase is then a task for a specific ditch. And so you can estimate the time to dig that ditch, and you can measure the actual time spent digging the ditch. You can estimate how many mistakes you think you're going to make. And when you're all done digging the ditch, you can look at the actual number of mistakes you found in digging the ditch, where you made the mistakes, where you fixed the mistakes. And also, as you go through the phases of digging a ditch, you can sign off the completion dates for each of these different tasks, and you'll have the completion dates for that. And there's your time, your mistakes, your dates. And then also the 4th one is the size. You can estimate the size, but you really can't measure the size until it's all done. Because you may find that if one of your steps is to have someone look at the ditch before you walk away from it, they may say, oh, it's the wrong length. And so only when you fix those mistakes, then you measure the actual size and you can record that as well. Don't try to read the text in these. This is just showing you the time logs, the mistake logs have lots of information about the time, about the mistakes, and all that is generated by the tool, whether using Excel or Process Dashboard or some other homegrown tool. The only parts that on here that are written were the mistake descriptions, which are worth their weight in gold. More on that in the quality framework. So an example of a standard. This is a standard for qualifying or categorizing mistakes when you're doing requirements generation. There's lots of different defect standards. This is just one for requirements. Down the left side, you have some numbers that are simply to differentiate and allow people to talk shorthand about them. Then you have a short title, and then you have a description. This way, when people find a mistake, they can categorize it in one of these 7 categories in this sense, and then they can look over their shoulder as a team or an individual and say, wow, most of my mistakes are 30s where I duplicate. And that then gives them an opportunity to say, how can I fix that and not make that mistake as often? And there you are improving your process. So, or find it earlier in the process, the other thing. We'll talk about that in quality. So putting all these pieces together, what TPI brings to the TPI, to the process framework is at the top there, in that blue box, you have the process. And that guides the individual doing the work to do the job. So that inputs coming down from the top is the inputs for in this case, the elicitation, which is talking to the experts to get the information that needs to become into the requirements. On the left side, you have the process scripts and standards. Those are guiding the individual as they go through these 6 steps. And while they're going through those 6 steps, they're logging time, logging mistakes found. And at the end of going through 6 steps, at the bottom of the blue box, you have the documented requirements. And then on the far right in the process plan frame summary, project plan summary, while they're doing this, they can report their progress to the rest of the team about how far they are through the process by talking about, well, I've got 80% of the work done because most of that 80% of that time was on the first 4 of the 6 steps. And so they can report that kind of progress to the team, just let them know that they're making progress on their work on their plate. Final slide for this module, a personal process is a set of steps, and it starts given that the idea of TPI is you have people doing work for a team. Individuals use a process to guide their work on the rock that they've been given to break down. I'm digging ditch number 5. Susie's digging ditch number 12 and 13. And so by using that process of digging a ditch, for example, you can not only use that process to plan your work and figure out how many ditches I can fit on my plate for the weekend, but while you're doing it, you can track your progress by going through the steps in that process that have been implemented in the plan as tasks, and track your progress by signing them off. And then when you look over your shoulder, you can say, wow, this is taking longer. I don't have my time distributed properly. So I better change the way my time distributed for the remaining 12 ditches I have to dig. And the scripts, the measures, the forms, the standards are all things that TPI encourages someone to use when they're putting a process together to make sure they have good guidance for the individuals using the process. So an entire team can use the same processes to do the same kind of task. You may have 5 people writing requirements, 6 people writing software, 4 people doing testing, and those people are all using the same process to do whatever aspect they're doing.